Mic check.
Have you ever watched something that just left you speechless? Something that unlocked a piece of you that you just didn't know existed? Something that completely altered your way of thinking, or your very way of life? For most people, Guilty Crown doesn't fit the bill. Not a single bit. By the time the series concluded, Guilty Crown had received, well, not the best reception. Critics labeled it a sloppy mess of a story that, despite starting off well with interesting story beats, left much to the imagination and much more to be desired. Now, I've got a love-hate relationship with this show. By all accounts, it sucks. The writing sucks, the characters are just dumb and unrelatable, making decisions that devolve into what-the-fuck moments, with a story so convoluted, so inexplicable and nonsensical to the average viewer who hasn't watched it 4 times like I have, because I hate myself deeply in ways I can't fix. But then you come to some of the better parts of the show. The animation, the fight scenes, the, albeit only in the first half of the show, intriguing plot points that make you wonder, what the hell is going on? And more importantly, where the hell is this going? And don't even get me started on the music. Not now, anyways. So really, if you can acknowledge the bad in something, while simultaneously enjoying its good elements, can you really say that it sucks? What's going on? How you doing? I'm Arnold, and I enjoy obscure things, so I started this series a while ago that I like to call Lost to Obscurity, where I discuss the things that I enjoy or find particularly interesting that I think aren't in the zeitgeist anymore. This time around, I'm talking about Guilty Crown, the 2011 anime produced by Production IG that's even to this day infamous in the anime sphere for one of the single biggest fumbles of all time. Directed by Tetsuo Araki, previously of Death Note fame in 2006, the series had immense hype as it was beginning, which slowly and surely lost momentum as the series painfully kept on chugging. I'll be covering a lot of why, but I'll just preface this video with a warning before you go ahead and comment, but Guilty Crown isn't obscure. I've been watching anime since 1963, and I've watched it 3 times, and I know everything about it, and I have a Tetsuo Araki Dakimakura, and... I know. I know Guilty Crown isn't obscure, and I know the only thing people have to say about it anymore, the chalk standard Reddit response of, "Oh, but the music is good," has been said 1,000 times before. Trust me, it might be hard to believe, but there are a bunch of people out there who've never even heard of this show before, let alone seen it. Therefore, I'll be taking a sort of retrospective stance with this one, so keep in mind that there will be spoilers ahead, both for the anime as well as for the visual novel that I'll be covering near the end. Anyways, just be warned, and on to the video. The major fuck-up that is Guilty Crown will be much easier to understand if we just cover the plot first, so we're gonna do exactly that. I'm warning you like literally 15 seconds after the last spoiler warning, but just be warned, this entire section will contain spoilers for both the show and by extension the visual novel. So if you don't want or need a plot breakdown, feel free to skip to the next marked chapter. The year is 2039. Japan has been gripped by a genetic virus known as the Apocalypse virus. 10 years prior, on Christmas Day, the virus spiraled out of control, resulting in complete chaos and the destruction of Japanese society in what would come to be known as Lost Christmas. In response, the UN established the GHQ, a transitional governing body formed through a multinational initiative to restore peace and order to Japan through force. Peace returns to Japan, however, it remains under the control of the GHQ as a quasi-independent nation, with limited self-rule. At night, a girl is seen escaping from the GHQ headquarters in the middle of Tokyo Harbor. She carries with her a mysterious package inside of a Robo-Bro, being relentlessly pursued by mech units known as enclaves. Leaving the facility, she is aided by a comrade who secures her exit, but not wholly, sustaining an injury and subsequently tumbling into the Tokyo Harbor. Omashu is your typical anime protagonist. He's quiet, subdued, and shy, the likes of which would probably piss you off if you tried to hold a conversation with him. Alas, he's what we've got to work with. Shu has a problem understanding people, their thoughts, and what to say to them in general, hiding behind an air of denseness to get past daily life. Despite that, he has some friends, Sota and Yahiro, who along with Shu comprise the members of a multimedia club, producing a video for an online contest. As he usually does, Shu retreats to one of the old school buildings, dilapidated since the riots of Lost Christmas, to enjoy his lunch alone. In a fated encounter, he stumbles across the girl from the beginning, ever wounded and yet entranced by a screen, which holds the fruits of Shu's efforts for the contest. Shu recognizes the girl as Inori, from the pop band Egoist, and it just so happens that the video Shu is making is an animatic of sorts for one of their songs, as he and the others in the club of sorts are big fans of Egoist's music. However, not long after, the GHQ shows up, having tracked down Inori and takes her away, most likely for her actions the night before. However, Shu doesn't know that. So, determined to man the fuck up and change for the better, Shu overcomes his cowardly affliction and follows the damaged Robo-Bro into the Roppongi Ghetto, established by the GHQ as a zone to quarantine those infected with the Apocalypse virus in an attempt to save her. He stopped by a group of thugs who try to steal Inori's Robo-Bro, thinking it's a rice cooker, who are mercilessly cut down by blonde-haired twink of the month, Guy Tsuzugame. He reveals himself to be the leader of the terrorist organization Funeral Parlor, an underground network that's been covertly targeting the GHQ for years, reclaiming the rice cooker Robo-Bro, aptly named Funeru, for his own, revealing what Inori had stolen, a vial that grants the user of the contents within the power of the king. A power which Guy explains grants the user the ability to summon ideas given form, which he plans to use on himself. Before he can, however, they're attacked by the GHQ, who, in an attempt to reclaim the vial, start exterminating the entire ghetto. Guy leaves the vial with Shu to protect and hide while he coordinates the ongoing fight. But of course, Shu decides to run straight at the GHQ forces in a foolhardy attempt to save Inori, which ends up with the vial getting shot and the power of the king transferring to Shu. Thus begins the plot of the first core of Guilty Crown. Spanning roughly 11 episodes, though the arc really ends with the 12th, this core is, at least to me, the more grounded of the two. The main point of admiration here is the story development. Now, the first core substantially develops the world and introduces the main concepts that we'll be exposed to over the course of the entire series, ideas and plot points that should be explained and developed later on in the show, which second core absolutely fails to develop on, but we'll get to that in a bit. Even so, these world developments, rather than being visually substantiated, are either explained through exposition dumps throughout the episodes, or just simply left to the viewer to imagine or look up, with information about certain topics or groups being skipped over entirely for brevity's sake, left instead to be read on the Guilty Crown website, though the information even there is incomplete, only including things in the first core. Despite that, the website still contains a lot of information and cool details that even I didn't know existed. So if you're looking for a little more exposition and information about some of the in-universe elements, go take a look. I'll leave a link in the description. These developments, dumps as they are, provide the viewer with at least some sense of immersion, attempting to make it seem like these characters that we're watching really do live in a world that has advanced scientifically and socially in the, 28 years in the future this series is set from the date of release? I'm making it seem like a big deal, but most of this stuff is just basic storytelling. As seen with the plethora of other sci-fi franchises that have come out over the years before and after it, the setting of your story simply just does not matter so long as that story is a mess. As a result, the show just throws out a lot of terms really fast in an attempt to make it seem like there's depth, while not truly developing those terms. It doesn't hurt to have a little bit of depth, or at least to attempt to, but it's the actual extent of said depth that leaves much to be desired in this case. Honestly, calling it depth is too much. A lot of the developments here are just puddle deep, with most being able to see them coming from a mile away. Now, Puddle Deep over here is compensated for heavily by its own aesthetic, remaining very much grounded to a realistic aesthetic all throughout. Though it attempts to sound grandiose and scientific with its use of big terms very casually, in a way that can be compared to Evangelion's similar attempt, which, by the way, is an obvious stylistic choice that I could spend an entire video developing in the many ways it's used throughout other anime, but I don't have all the time in the world. Anyways, it backs up the use of these scientific mind rapers with a visually developed, realistic, and interesting aesthetic where we visually see the progression from old to new. Like the sign slider just gets turned up slightly over the course of the show. Vehicles such as cars, tanks, and mechs are designed to invoke modern designs and as such aren't entirely futuristic, unrecognizable designs that you would see in other sci-fi properties. We're also witness to the evolution of this technology, with multiple examples of different stages of development as well. This development is mostly limited to the Endlave, which we see go from older units like the Jumeau type, to the mass-produced Gautier type, and the later experimental units of the GHQ. However, constant visual comparisons between the old world and the new world are given, with architecture, clothing, and tools. Weapons exemplify this greatly, with most of them based on real-life weapons with slight sci-fi-ish modifications. The GHQ uses mainly expensive and advanced Western weaponry consistent with modern-day Western militaries, with Funeral Parlor, in stark contrast yet in typical insurgent fashion, using cheap, inexpensive, and improvised weapons, with an assortment of mainly Eastern-made designs and old Western designs, providing us with yet another comparison between old and new. Now, one of the key methods of stylistic differentiation that Guilty Crown uses to separate itself from other shows, like that of Code Geass, lies in the design of the voids. Voids, the main tools that Shu has at his disposal, which he can use through his power of the king, are designed in a way to make them unique and exceptional, as each void is unique to the point of origination, i.e. the person that it was taken from, with each void being an abstract representation of someone's soul or personality. As a result of this, you get a balanced variety of voids, each with their own use cases. Now, when I say balanced, I mean in design, with each void being both visually differentiated to represent their stark differences in use, yet at the same time thematically comparable in the ways that they shape each episode's contents. Inori's void is designed to look nothing like Haru's, as Inori's is a giant sword meant to kill and destroy. You know, sword things, reflecting her existence as a human weapon. Haru's void, on the other hand, is a bandage roll, meant to repair and heal, reflecting her supportive nature. Yet, in the end, they're both voids, visually denoted by a purple and gray mystical spiral effect that all voids share, helping the viewer to tell apart the voids that Shu summons from some of the sci-fi man-made weapons that the show places in the hands of its other characters. Supplementing these developments, and ever lurking in the background of almost every scene, is the musical score. I know I don't speak for myself when I say that the soundtrack for this show is great. I listen to it constantly on my own time. I sleep to it, I hype myself up to it, it's great. Composed by Hiroyuki Sawano, the Guilty Crown original soundtrack spans 19 tracks over 75 minutes, with 9 of the tracks being vocal tracks and the rest instrumentals. Sawano blends a whole lot to make this soundtrack what it is. Lyrics for songs like BIOS are entirely in German and English, with not a single track in Japanese. In their composition, pretty much all of the tracks use a blend of heavy metal, light rock, electronic synths, electronic guitar, acoustic guitar, classical piano, violin, and even African tribal beats. It's the signature blend of many different tones, beats, and rhythms that makes each track so different and so memorable, which only makes this soundtrack stand out more than any other. Following the series' conclusion, an extended version of the soundtrack was released, the Guilty Crown Complete soundtrack, comprising most of the original tracks, plus a couple extra tracks that weren't included in the original soundtrack, with some remixes thrown in for good measure. If I'm lucky, you'll have been hearing some of these tracks in the background of this video, though I'll probably not be able to use all of them, seeing as the copyright owner, Sony Entertainment, has a pretty draconian enforcement of their intellectual property. Which is well within their rights, but to that, I say, go fuck yourself and let me tell people how much I enjoy it in peace. If you have 3 hours of your time, give it a listen, it's worth it. In all, the first core of Guilty Crown boasts an interesting premise with great design and even better music, attempting to provide a world for viewers to become interested in and immersed in. Yet there's only really so much you can do with 11 episodes. I want to be a fly on the wall in the writer's room when they decided on fucking incest. I'm gonna have to devolve from here on out, because what happens in this part of the show honestly just never ceases to amaze me despite how much I love it. Yet I'd like to not get into specifics for those that haven't watched it. Despite that, you see some of the events of this core coming from a mile away, and others which appear quite literally out of thin air. The reason the second core is so ridiculed is because the story devolves from a scenario that made, at the very least, some sense, into a scenario which, while still somewhat being based in sense, calling it such would be a very distinct way to describe it. Following the conclusion of the previous core, for one reason or another, Shu and company find themselves trapped in the middle of Tokyo with no way out. With hundreds of students stuck at the school, and the situation becoming more dire by the day, Shu is elected student council president, and made to head the school and its population through the crisis at hand. Again, this is the middle of the plot, so without spoiling much of the main story, and to put it mildly, things happen, and Shu's previous gracious rule is replaced with a despotic system of ranks and classes. Fuck mildly. To put it bluntly, Shu becomes Hitler. Well, not Hitler per se, but it's a moment so fucking Hitler-esque, a moment so completely out of character, that for me and many other people, wiped out any semblance of sense. Core 2, as a result, kills any momentum that Core 1 had with a face-palming groan. I'm being kind of hyperbolic here, it's honestly not that bad. It's not like you're gonna stop watching it right here at this point just because the plot becomes a little retarded for a second. Despite that, there is a noticeable droop that the plot takes over the course of the 11 episodes that make up the second core, which feels at times like some plot points are either pulled out of the script's ass, or are so far-fetched that even people like me, who can understand and somewhat see the small, extremely thin threads that link the story beats together, find it hard to justify. And trust me, if the only reason I can is because I've gaslit myself into believing that it makes sense after 3 full rewatches of this goddamn show. If it feels like I'm skimming over this part, it's because I am. I really don't want to spoil massive segments of the show that would ruin the viewing experience of a first-time viewer, so just please understand that. I'll go over some of the spoilers in another section later on, along with some of my more contentious points. Much of the elements that made Guilty Crown such an immersive show in the first Cour remain in the second. Realistic design elements such as world design and technology remain and evolve with the show as the episodes progress, with both aspects shifting to react to the story. As mentioned before, the technology also adapts, with new Enlave units being shown with upgrades based on Void technology. In the world design corner, Apocalypse crystals are shown lurking everywhere, with destruction and a sense of desperation marked into every corner of Tokyo and every character that was shown. The second Cour differentiates itself in this way from the first visually, also adapting a more Void-esque aesthetic on top of the already grounded sci-fi aesthetic, with the use of voids in the second Cour taking center stage. On top of this, the show attempts to focus a little more on the main characters, trying desperately to get some character progression in during the downtime between plot points. This progression, however, only really manifests in Shu, which would be expected seeing as he's the main character. However, the balance of progression is non-existent. Even then, for most of the season, Shu's character progression is actually for the worse, becoming the one thing that most people didn't want him to become any more of: more annoying. In shifting from the whiny child that he was at the beginning of the first Cour, Shu matures into his gloomy, sulky teenage era, with the emotional maturity to match, gaining a duality of responses ranging from either violence to running to cry in his Discord kitten's arms whenever confronted with any issue. Eventually, he does grow out of it, but we as the viewers don't get to experience Shu in a state of emotional maturity for long, as by the moment we reach the full completion of his character arc, the show is basically over. With that, we're left with a bad taste in our mouths for most of the Cour, ultimately understanding the endpoint of his character, but longing for how it probably, or more likely should have been, achieved long ago, and that most of the aspects of the show that people dislike, notably the characters and their noticeable lack of believability or development, could have been improved at least a bit. In most ways, the second Cour builds upon the foundation of the first, with stylistic elements improving and adapting as time goes on. However, elements such as the characters, their progression and their connection to the plot, failed to live up to the expectations that the first Cour set. This leaves us with a couple of questions. Most notably, how did it get to this point? If you're looking for a review that completely encompasses the experience of watching Guilty Crown, one that shows truly how jarring the viewing experience that led to its oftentimes overstated and hyperbolized horror reception, I'd recommend you read Swabulous Max's 2012 review of Guilty Crown. It's by far the most popular review of Guilty Crown within the community, getting referenced pretty much any time someone mentions how nonsensical the plot can be. It's kind of like a stream of consciousness piece made up of semi-separate rants about different parts of the show. Honestly, it's more of a comedic piece than it is actually critical, which was most probably their intent. Despite that, they do succeed in accurately targeting what made Guilty Crown so unsuccessful in its attempt to be a hit original anime, so I'll cover a bit of what's said in this 13-year-old review. Of course, still spoilers ahead, but this time also for Code Geass, so if you haven't watched that already, you should, it's great, but be warned. I'll state what I believe to be the case for the result of Guilty Crown as clearly as I can. In attempting to make the best shonen anime that they could, with the best music, the best characters, and the best animation, Tetsuo Araki and by extension the writing team at Production IG had neglected to develop emotionally intelligent and believable characters in favor of developing the plot, in turn suspending the belief of their viewers. This suspension of belief, stemming from the somewhat unbelievable and unrelatable nature of many of the characters, caused many plot points to seem either unfounded or nonsensical, as character motivations which had sparked plot points made no sense in and of themselves, or were simply poorly explained. As a whole, many of the issues with Guilty Crown stem from the character writing, which then goes on to taint all other aspects of the plot. I'll explain and reiterate on a lot of the points that Swabulous Max makes in his review, many of which I agree with, but to start, many of the characters are very poorly written, with most of them being downright unlikable and unrelatable, and the rest being either fan service or lacking any development whatsoever. It seems that in trying to connect Shu to a Shinji-type character, they took many of the aspects that made Shinji relatable, his somewhat traumatic past, his struggle for love, and his path towards loving himself, without creating the foundation for which those aspects of his character are made believable. As a result, Shu is, and remains, our particularly insufferable character, especially for the first half of the show, which, like Shinji, he spends in a state of child-esque somber, whining his way through central problems, only barely lifting a finger to improve his situation, and when he does, it's in response to either a selfish or rather nonsensical desire. Again, despite comparable traits, his emergence from this state is in no way comparable to the character development that characters like Shinji undergo. Shinji puts himself through the ringer constantly, despite it bringing him nothing but pain. Yet he continues on with it anyway. He pilots the EVA even though he doesn't want to, for the sake of protecting the people he loves. This strength that he builds through his fight, not only with himself, but with those who would aim to hurt his friends, gives him the courage to make the hard decisions, to go against the wishes of his father, whose love was his sole desire, to mark his own path based on his own beliefs. To say that Shu undergoes some of this, if not any of this, would be an understatement. Shu, like Shinji, decides to fight of his own volition, to prove his worth not just to others, but to himself as well. However, whereas Shinji takes his pain in stride, only occasionally showing weakness, Shu makes it a point to complain at every possible occasion. Even today, Shinji has the reputation for being a crybaby in the anime community and abroad, with many seeing him as just a whiner who should just pilot the robot and shut up. Ironically enough, bar some moments, Shinji internalizes a lot of his suffering. Shu, however, seemingly tends to express his dissatisfaction about anything, without thinking about any other viewpoint. While he makes similar mistakes, getting his friends and others hurt and even killed in the process, the path to redemption, to maturity, that exists with Shinji, which is one of the key reasons behind the sense of relatability that a lot of people have with Shinji, the effort and pain put into changing for the better and living for yourself, isn't replicated to the same depth with Shu, ultimately leading some character developments to seem rather sudden, like with the aforementioned Hitler arc. Thus, even if Shu's story is definitely a believable one that makes it easy for people to resonate with him at the beginning, with his shy and lonely life, the manner by which his character progresses throughout all 22 episodes simply feels unnatural, like leaps were made where hops simply would have done better. Moving on, we have Inori. Inori maintains little to no personality throughout the show, in the same vein as Evangelion's Rei Ayanami. However, like before, the two characters remain incomparable. Rei undergoes significant progression as the story unfolds. Through her connections not only with Shinji but with Misato, Asuka, and every other cast member that comes across her path, she learns what it's like to truly be human, what it's like to suffer, to have fun, to simply live. Inori doesn't. We get glimpses of some potential enlightenment or development occasionally, however, as is standard, we never get much, with her only really reaching a turning point at the very end, with her sacrificing her life to stop the genomic resonance, symbolizing not only her acceptance of her fate, but her love for Shu. This plays into the idea that Nori really isn't her own character, or her own person, since she's a clone of Mana, Shu's sister, existing mainly to be a muse for both him and Guy. Speaking of her connection to Shu, is there even any? She latches onto him pretty quick, yet despite all the time they spend together, their relationship barely goes through any seemingly meaningful development until halfway through the second core, and by then, the relationship is already established. Personally, it feels forced, and I know that's not an uncommon opinion. If a literal empty vessel for the end of the world can have character progression, why can't she? Overall, there is depth to Inori's character, though it's even less than that of Shu's. However, her motivations and arc as a whole leaves the depth to be, again, as deep as a puddle, leaving her as a missed opportunity, ultimately ending with nothing about her having really changed. Guy, as interesting as he might seem, is also a very shallow character. Seemingly a fusion of Gendo from Evangelion and Lelouch from Code Geass, his only goal is, like Gendo, to revive his childhood love. But like Lelouch, the steps he takes to get to that point are idiotic and dramatic as all hell, cementing him as a failed attempt to be like both the aforementioned characters, but with a forced level of swagger and drama that would make even Lelouch roll in his shallow grave. Indeed, Guy has a dual nature. He's strong, yet weak, overthinking, yet doesn't see everything. An interesting character, but with overemphasized interest placed on him. The show kind of makes it seem like at times that the main character was supposed to be Guy, which honestly, if you look at it from the "this show is exactly like Code Geass" perspective, would make a whole lot of sense, with many of the plot points revolving around his very existence. However, he's not. The plot points surrounding him, notably his revival and connection to Shu, are pulled from seemingly nowhere in flashbacks, and like a lot of other things in the show, with very little extra explanation. And I know what you're gonna say. Oh, but why have exposition dumps when they can just show it to you? It's because even then, they barely do. This is less a problem with Guy and more with all the other characters as a whole, but more often than not, character exposition is skipped over for a short scene of a character's background, alongside later quips recalling either said scene or others which we have yet to see, attempting to have the viewer go into recollective shock, finally putting two and two together. But most of the time, watchers just end up with either confusion, or with the viewer not even noticing or realizing the connotations behind what was just said. Those are the main three characters that take up most of the show, with side characters like Ayase, who Max dubs Asuka in a wheelchair without character development, only exemplifying the issues at hand. Honestly, many of the female characters miss a lot of the development that more of the male characters get, which would have been nice to have if all of the characters, male or female, weren't already fighting over mere breadcrumbs. Many of the characters in Guilty Crown lack a substantial amount of development which they could have received if more time had been spent on individual characters instead of piecing together the connections to the overarching story, prying away any meaningful emotional connection someone could have had with any of the characters and replacing it with nothing but a general sense of apathy. For example, Ogumo's sacrifice in the tail end of the second Cour carries very little weight to it. While we as the viewer have been exposed to Ogumo since practically the beginning of the series, we know literally fuck all about him, bar the fact that he's part of the Undertakers and that he's fucking huge. If you're gonna make such a big deal about a character's sacrifice, dedicating a good 5 to 7 minutes of runtime in an already short 22-minute episode viewing it, and having the characters talking about it, at the very least, dedicate a bit of time to making the viewer react emotionally to the event. I'll come back to that in a second, but for now, I just want to bring this over to something else. Now, on and on during my research, and even before that, I heard a suffocating amount of times that Guilty Crown was simply a worse version of this other show, Code Geass. Up until this March, I'd watched Guilty Crown 4 times, 3 times in the year prior and once in February for this review. Despite it being on my to-watch list for years, I'd never thought of giving it the light of day. Yet, with all the comparisons being made, I thought it was only fair. So, I watched the entirety of Code Geass. Within the span of a month, I watched Code Geass, Code Geass R2, all of the OVAs for both, the Akira the Exiled movies, which, by the way, were way better than most people say, and Lelouch the Resurrection. And by God, they were right. They were fucking right! The comparisons are so in your face, it's almost comical. I went ballistic, laughing to myself as I was watching the first episode, seeing how many connections I could make, only to be sent into another dimension when the same set of events played out. A conquered Japan, a girl escapes a government scientific facility who has connections to the main character's family in some way, with our main character, who just so happens to be outside school, receiving a king's power in some way through a chance encounter with the girl surrounded by soldiers, all the while reconciling with a childhood friend with a warped sense of justice that will eventually become his adversary. While the plot devolves from there, a lot of the plot aspects when laid out, as I just did, paint a truly suspect scene that only makes me laugh the more and more I think about it. Anyways, the main point I want to make here is that, in a similar time frame as Ogumo, Code Geass, the show that this is all apparently based on, specifically in the second season, Code Geass R2, the writers are able to introduce a character and successfully create an emotional attachment to the viewer only to have him sacrifice himself for another main character. That character is Rollo, the planted assassin pretending to be Lelouch's brother. Rollo lives an existence void of any connection, yet with his introduction to Lelouch, he's granted one for the first time in his life. Over the course of the season, we see the extent of the devotion that Rollo has towards Lelouch, proving his loyalty time and time again even after Lelouch proves himself to be a threat to Britannia that should be eliminated, the very reason he was put by his side in the first place. It's this very connection that is built between Lelouch and Rollo, even though Lelouch views Rollo as nothing but a tool until the very end, that solidifies the emotional reaction that the viewer has for Rollo. The viewer sympathizes for Rollo, who sacrifices himself understanding that even if Lelouch and his connection wasn't real, the time they spent together was, and that his sacrifice is indeed a tragic one. None of this is felt with Ogumo. Not at all. I understand that these characters fulfill different roles in the story, that Rollo is a much more central character than Ogumo, but the point remains that Guilty Crown, with its many characters, could barely muster up one emotional scene, while Code Geass could've, or rather did, muster up multiple. You can say it stems to a fundamental difference in the skill or talent of the writing team, the ability of the animators to bring it to life, what have you, but in the end, it all comes back to the amount of time spent actually developing these characters. Code Geass dedicates a lot of its runtime developing its main characters, their ambitions, their goals, their motivations, through which the story gains relevance and importance, clarity. Yet with only 2 more episodes in its first season, it's able to achieve so much more, and rise so much higher. Guilty Crown in comparison does the exact opposite, thereby rendering a picture based solely on plot, void of any of the attachment that comes with the development of its characters. This isn't just limited to Rolo either. Most if not all of the characters, even if we limit it to just the first season for fairness' sake, have their character development filled out past what would be required, their motivations and goals laid bare, their traits and quirks exposed until a point of almost oversaturation. Lelouch, Callan, C2, Suzaku, Kaname, Jeremiah, Valletta, Deedhard, from major character to minor character, each one has a distinct reason to fight, to act, to defend, protect, and serve. That's what separates the two, and it's what makes Code Geass so much better, and much more entertaining. Again, the story being what it is not the problem. There have been weirder stories across the entirety of the medium that have done way better than Guilty Crown, and pulled more out of its ass in a more believable way than it ever could have. It's just that the characters in those shows are much more solidified, allowing for an unbelievable story, because they themselves are the grounding aspect, and that simply doesn't exist with Guilty Crown. The characters, their connections to each other, and the effects that they have on the show as a whole simply aren't enough to balance the lackluster story. Despite its lackluster reception, however, attempts were made at making Guilty Crown a multimedia franchise. All in all, 2 manga series, a light novel, and a visual novel accompanied by an OVA were produced concurrently with or after Guilty Crown. The first manga series, simply titled Guilty Crown, was a 1-to-1 adaptation of the anime into manga format. Spanning 7 volumes and 26 chapters, and written by Yosuke Miyagi and illustrated by Shion Mizuiki, it was included in Square Enix's monthly Shonen Gangan between November 2011 and December 2013. Some new scenes are included, other scenes are excluded, but it really is just a companion manga with no major discernible differences. The second manga series, entitled Guilty Crown Dancing Enclaves, is a spin-off, exploring Ayase and Tsugumi's past. Spanning only 3 volumes, written by Gon Sunaku and illustrated by Ryosuke Fukai, it was featured in ASCII Media Works' Dengeki G's magazine from July of 2012 to May of 2014. There's not really much I can say about this one because, unlike the Guilty Crown manga, there's only 1 volume available online to read, and it's entirely in Japanese, limiting its accessibility to most, including me. The light novel, entitled Guilty Crown Princess of Deadpool, is yet another spin-off, this time exploring the Undertakers. Comprising only 1 volume, it was written by Gon Sunaku, with the illustrations made by Production IG and Nitro Plus, with Sunaku being a Nitro Plus employee, releasing in April 2012. Again, same thing, obscure, hard to find, and only in Japanese. Last, but certainly not least, we have the more famous of the bunch, the visual novel, Guilty Crown Last Christmas. Developed as a spin-off title by Nitro Plus, with scenarios written by Jin Hanegaya, it was released July 26, 2012, alongside a 12-minute OVA, which served as a promotion for the VM. Serving as a prequel to Guilty Crown, it covers the events of Last Christmas and before from the eyes of Scrooge and Carol, Saphira Genomics test subjects, as they attempt to find out about their past. It's not a very long visual novel, with each run taking about 4 hours to finish, so with the 2 endings, the good ending and the bad ending, you'll be looking at a solid 8 hours of extra Guilty Crown content. Plus, if you do both endings, you're treated to a secret 100% webpage, with little thank you notes from all the voice actors, artists, and developers that worked on the game, which is pretty neat. If you're interested, I have a playthrough on my channel which you can also watch. The finale of Guilty Crown was seen by many as a complete letdown, a far cry from the path many thought the story would take. Though much of that anticipation was born from hype, the rather sharp ending still affects the legacy of Guilty Crown to this day. Many saw the show as a letdown, though not Production IG, which would use the lessons they learned from its production to create the anime original masterpiece, Psycho-Pass, only 1 year later. Funnily enough, Psycho-Pass fulfills a lot of the criteria, the wants and expectations that Production IG had set out for Guilty Crown, what with its Japan-centric plot and realistic setting. Hell, it even aired on the same block as Guilty Crown, the Noitamina block, attempting to reach the same audience. The show, as a result, was a massive success, spawning 2 sequel series, as well as 6 movies. However, its popularity has been constrained mainly to Japan for the most part, with Western audiences either not knowing that it exists, or simply being uninterested. However, the man himself, Tetsuo Araki, was ultimately dissatisfied with the results of Guilty Crown, stating himself in an interview, for which I cannot find a date and that we'll just call from now on Interview 1, that, for me, it was an unfortunate anime. What we accomplished with this series, everything we did, I feel like people gave it too little credit, which was entirely correct. The animation quality that Araki's team was able to put out was simply astonishing for the time, and he knew this too. Yet Araki seemed to know what had gone wrong with Guilty Crown, tying its failures to the environment in which it was produced. With producer Tetsuya Nakatake stating in an interview in the fall of 2016 that, while we were working on Guilty Crown, we realized that the quality of the production was at its peak, and that we needed a new environment. This chase for change ultimately culminated with Araki coming together with multiple other producers from Production IG to create a new studio, administered by IG but creatively independent. This studio would become WIT Studio. WIT's first production was the anime adaptation of the manga series Attack on Titan, which Araki would direct, and which I have yet to watch, much to my friend Michael's dismay, who's been trying to get me to watch it for like 5 years now. Anyways, it was a smash hit, finding success in Japan and abroad, with Nakatake attributing its success to the fact that it could be fluidly created as we were able to focus on the creative aspect of the production. Despite its success, however, Araki still wanted to prove that he could make a successful original anime, claiming in Interview 1 that same fact. Basically, this is what I always say. I want to make an original anime that really breaks through, but I haven't managed to do it yet. Araki would attempt to do so a couple years later, releasing Kebunari of the Iron Fortress in 2016, to some success. In the 2016 interview, Araki stated that his intention with Kebunari was to create a charismatic character which could be liked by everyone, and would push people to watch the show. Whether he was able to succeed is a topic for another time, but he goes on to say that, on Guilty Crown, we were focused with the story, and the narration was all about the plot and not the characters. This time, while still focusing on the story, we did our best also to write better characters, proving that Araki in fact learned from Guilty Crown, and decided to improve himself and his abilities not only as a director, but as a writer, rather than forsake it all as a fluke. I really think that's admirable, and more worthy of praise than anything else. As for me, to answer the original question that I posed at the beginning of this video, if you can acknowledge the bad in something, while simultaneously enjoying its good elements, can you really say that it sucks? I've been around a while. Not as long as many, but decently long. I've surrounded myself in discourse around anime, manga, and the effects that they've had on people, culture, what have you. Like many other communities, both online and in the real world, the vocal minority often decides the course of discourse, leading to opinions that would otherwise not be the majority consensus instead taking hold. With that said, it's my opinion that the consensus around Guilty Crown has been way overblown, out of proportion to the actual state of the show, which I feel is only recently beginning to calm down. For what seems like forever, every forum, from Reddit to fucking Xbox Live parties of all places, has spread this belief that for all the reasons I mentioned, Guilty Crown is an objectively bad show, and that, well, it sucks. Well, I mean, they're not exactly wrong. Despite that, through all the people I've talked with, and you're gonna have to take me on my word here, or if you agree, you can just corroborate it down in the comments, but many, if not the majority, who have viewed this show, still enjoy it for one reason or another. Most for the music, but many for nostalgia, a sense of a better time, which leads them to enjoy it even despite the quality of its story, which honestly most people simply don't care about as much as you'd think, or as much as the elitists like myself would have you think. Hell, even thinking back, I remember a comment from 9anime, or Anywave, whatever you want to call it, of a dude who had watched Guilty Crown 20-something times because it was the only show that he liked. Despite it all, there is a community around Guilty Crown to this day, making memes, edits, and even Minecraft builds. This is the one part of the video where, honestly, I don't even know what else to say other than people have been misled about Guilty Crown, and that people have been exaggerating about how bad it is for a long time. If it really was so bad, would there still be a community? Would there still be thousands of people who still fondly remember the show, listen to the music, and look back on all of it with fondness and remembrance for a simpler time in their lives? In the end, I think Guilty Crown remains a hallmark relic of the early 2010s anime sphere. Even though it may be complete fucking ass at times, I and many others enjoy it for what it is, rather than what it could have been. And ultimately, and I think this goes for a lot more than just this, but look past the opinions of other people and just enjoy what you want to enjoy. Find joy in the things that make you laugh. Who cares? And that's really about it. If you made it to this point, thanks for sticking around to the end. I honestly kind of feel sorry for making you sit through all that, but if you actually did, that hopefully means you enjoyed it. As I said at the beginning, I started writing the script for this video in March, after I said that it would be done at the end of February, but I stopped working on it for a while. Like literally, I wrote like 2 paragraphs and then put it on hold until June, where most of the work actually happened. Even then, this video was supposed to come out like the 13th of October, the 14th anniversary of Guilty Crown, with 14 also being about how old I was when I originally started watching this show. Though, I've been so preoccupied with a whole bunch of other things going on in my life that I haven't really gotten to it yet. Again, I think Guilty Crown is one of those shows where it really doesn't matter what others think of it. I mean, this really applies to anything, but if you enjoy it, you don't have to worry about what others think. You enjoy it, who cares? Don't let other people tell you what to and what not to enjoy. It's as simple as that. On that note, for those that still don't know me, and I don't blame you because I have like 140 subs, I'm Arnold, and I make a mix of content, though what I really enjoy are these long-form videos where I can take advantage of my somewhat useless English degree to flex my insane literacy skills. So if you're interested in more content like this, I have 2 other videos like this already on my channel. One about Egoist, which is more recent, and another about Yukikaze, which I'm currently in the process of completely redoing. Also, feel free to like and subscribe. I'm a full-time college student with a job, so don't expect too much, but I have a lot of free time, so maybe I'll put more effort into this if it gets a little bit more popular. Anyway, thanks again for watching. See you soon.